All right, so why don't we dive in here? Gentlemen, you ready for a little quick IFTF intro and then we'll dive in? Terrific. So, hello, I am Daria Lamb. I am IFTF's ambassador to the future. And that means that I spend my time introducing people to the concept of futures thinking, the value of it, and the work of the Institute for the Future. And I am excited today to bring you all this webinar series on foresight from our Foresight Talk series on freedom dreaming in the midst of emergency. And I think we're going to hear a really exciting conversation today with Calvin Williams and my colleague, Hadari Davis. Let me just give you a little bit of context about the Foresight Talk series and the work of the Institute and our Foresight Essentials program. So our agenda for today is to give you a little bit of a glimpse into the opportunities to learn foresight at IFTF, and then we'll do this wonderful webinar conversation, and then we want to hear from you. So at any point, please enter into the Q&A. Whenever something pops up into your head as you're curious about, you want to learn about, please put it into the Q&A. IFTF's Foresight Essentials is a rich program for learning the foundations of foresight, how to understand and build your own foresight practice, as well as some specialty areas. So we have 3 courses that we offer on an ongoing basis. Foresight Essentials, our full program, our flagship program. Design Futures, an opportunity to focus in on the tools that are bringing things to life. And then Scenario Building, again, a deep dive into that. Those are courses that we offer in an open enrollment, independent, ongoing fashion for individuals. And on Coursera, we offer courses. There's a futures thinking course that is self-paced and self-guided. You can audit the course for free. It's a modest fee to get the certificate of completion. And we also have a Life After COVID course on Coursera. And then for teams, we do custom trainings where we match up what your needs and areas of sophistication are and help bring foresight into your organization and build a culture of foresight and a common vocabulary and toolkit. We also offer future back accelerators, labs for senior executives to bring foresight into their work. We have lots of courses coming up. The Scenario Building will be next month. I'm actually the lead of the October open enrollment Foresight Essentials training. And then in November is the Design Futures. And I believe right now there are spaces available in all of those. And as a member of the Foresight community at IFTF, we have not only these Foresight talks, but we also on deep dives into topics. We also have Ask a Futurist. You can be matched up with a futures buddy. You can come to meetup conversations, get our newsletters, and follow our channel on Medium. So lots and lots of resources, as our mission is to build the community of foresight. So we're on Zoom today. Introduce yourself. There is chat. Make sure that when you're using the chat that you are deciding whether intentionally you're going to all panelists and attendees, and use your questions in the Q&A, and everyone is automatically muted and your videos are turned off. So enough about IFTF Foresight Essentials and the programs. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague and fellow Foresight Essentials instructor, Hadari Davis. Hadari is a wonderful, has a wonderful background and mix of being an educator, an artist, an activist, a community organizer, and he's going to host this conversation with Calvin, and I'll be behind the scenes now.
Right on. Thank you, Daria. Thank you for that welcome. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to this conversation with Calvin Williams, co-founder of the Wakanda Dream Lab. My name is Hadari Davis. I'm a Foresight Essentials faculty member and Futures Fellow at IFTF. I'm speaking to you from the ancestral land of the Ohlone people, also known as Oakland, California, and I'm excited to be here with you this morning. We're here to have a conversation not just about Calvin's innovative work, but also to contextualize Afrofutures and Afrofuturism to the practice of futuring, foresight, and forecasting. Oftentimes, Afrofuturism is spoken of in terms that limit it to an aesthetic or philosophical movement. And it's my hope that this conversation will shed light on some of the practice and pedagogy of Afrofuturing and its implications for the future. So I want to start by saying pluriversality is an assumption in this conversation. We're not going to be speaking or spending our time justifying the work or the idea of Afrofuturism. Rather, we'll be sharing insights and models of the work that Afrofuturists do to shed light on the depth and value of multiple perspectives and approaches to visioning the future, especially the value of what I refer to as fugitive futures, which is something that Calvin and I have talked about. So I'm sure you've read Calvin's bio, so I don't want to read you his bio right now. If you don't know who Calvin is, which I'm sure you do because you're here, but if you don't, Google Calvin Williams while he's introducing us to the work of the Wakanda Dream Labs. And Brother Calvin, welcome. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you all being part of this conversation. Appreciate being part of it. And anytime I could be in conversation with you, Hadar, it's like, let's get it.
Let's get it. You know, we've talked about so many things over so many years. So to be in the company of the world talking about the future is exciting. So
absolutely.
Let's start the conversation by introducing everyone to the work of the lab. So I know you have maybe a couple of slides to share. So
sure.
I want to give you that opportunity to kind of contextualize the work that you're doing.
I definitely will share the screen. Before I do that, just want to quickly just welcome folks as well in all the ways that I was welcomed when I knew I was among people that said you're home. So what's up? Good morning. Buenos dias. ¿Cómo está? Assalamu alaikum. Any good way that you feel welcomed and greeted, I come with that same energy. My work with Wakanda Dream Lab did initiate as a collective dream, as it were, to think of how those of us who imagine ourselves as Afrofuturists or Afrofuturist co-conspirators in the work of liberatory practice, particularly for Black liberation that begets the liberation of all peoples. How could we create a space that felt so irresistible that everyone would say yes to it, right? And that really is what inspired the practices and methodologies and the production. I think a lot of what we're known for is our production, but so much of it is girded by the brilliance and work and the rigors around Afrofuturism as practice. So I'm looking forward to being able to talk about it in a moment. So we're going to share just a few things about Wakanda Dream Lab. I'm going to share my screen. It'll have the visuals that some of which is in augmented reality. If you have heard of this app called Artivive and you already have it, bring it up on your phone. If not, I'll show you how to do so really quickly. And I noticed that this is being recorded. So if you're not able to do it in real time, or you don't have another smartphone or other device to be able to use the Artivive app, don't worry about it in real time. We could do it in virtual time. So in some ways, we're all going to be Afrofuturists one way or another, right? So you can do it in virtual. My screen, just make it a little larger so everyone can see it. And give me a thumbs up if you see the augmented reality. All right. So for those of you who have not heard of Artivive, you can do 3 easy steps. You're already doing the first step. View this presentation on a separate device other than your smartphone, right? Because you'll need one for the screens to see the image and then another next to you to be able to pull up the app, all right? Step number 2, take out your phone or other device. Maybe it's a, iPad or other book, and you can go to this QR code, which should take you directly to the App Store for Artivive. And you could choose the one that relates to your phone. I got an Android, and so it took me directly to Google Play. I'll leave that up for a little bit, but you could also just go to artivive.com on your phone, and it will also take you to download the correct place to download the app, right? And then the third step is, skipped a step. Third step, open up the app. All you got to do is open it up, and it will look just like opening up your phone app. Your camera on your phone. So just look like your camera app. You'll notice it'll open up, and all you'll have to do is look at the art on the screen through your phone using the app Artivive, and some other images, motion art will emerge. So let's try it out. I won't take up too much more time around that. Let's try it out. For those of you who can, just give us a thumbs up once you've tried it out and if it worked. All right, great, great. Yeah, sometimes Wi-Fi is the trickiest part to this entire experiment. So apologies if it's lagging a little bit. What you will see, if you haven't done so, or what you are seeing, is the Wakanda Dream Lab logo, which is a mask with various points towards towards the different ways futures can flow, right? Forward, backward, above, under, and around. And it takes you to this portal in the backdrop, a celestial portal that reveals the words Wakanda Dream Lab. And you hear an excerpt from one of our first anthologies called A Wakandan Immigration Story. And it gives a brief excerpt in which we're reminded that these are all our children, and a reminder of why we need to dream. So wanted to share that as a little bit of a teaser trailer for those of you who could experience it. And there's a couple other Easter eggs that of art pieces that I have later in the presentation that also go with Artivive that we will do probably closer to the end so we can keep the bulk of the time in conversation. So very briefly, just want to give a big just shout out and appreciation for my co-conspirators who started Wakanda Dream Lab along with me, Aisha Shillingford and Terry Marshall, both of whom live in Brooklyn. They also have their own creative agency and boutique called Intelligent Mischief, and Rufar Barada, who also is out here in Oakland, who were all part of the Movement Strategy Center transitions community, where we asked ourselves the question, how might we transform a world organized in violence, extraction, and into a world that's organized by interdependence and resilience. And the question that we began to refine was really, how might we transform ourselves into a world that's rooted in the values of abolition, liberation, and reparation in a way that allows our dreams to live abundantly. And that became the mantra for Wakanda Dream Lab. I won't read this word for word. I think the main parts I want to just point out, we'll talk more about in the conversation about the poetic, proleptic, prophetic methodologies of Afrofuturism really being part of the work. And it really, that's just the meaning making, the myth making, and then the story making that we do. And we do that with various anthologies, including Memories for Abolition Day. This was an anthology done in collaboration with PolicyLink, where Wakanda Dream Lab did a world building workshop between Juneteenth to July 4th to imagine a world without prisons and policing, and what abolition itself could be a portal into in terms of safety, freedom, and our reimagining concepts of justice in that way. And so that's an example of some of the body of work that we do, is collaborative world building to create anthologies of the future and telling stories that also invite people to imagine how we can take these future artifacts, archives, and anthologies into our thinking about today. So a little bit of prefigurative politics there. I think I'm going to end it there just because we'll talk more about the work of what we do. I'll just name a few other anthologies, including immigration, gender futurism, and also been exploring climate futures. So really being able to identify a particular impact campaign with organizations or collectives that are advancing that work in real time in real life, and applying the practice of visionary fiction to creating these anthologies. And this is a body of work that I attribute to Walida Imarisha and Adrienne Marie Brown, who some of you may know through Octavia's Brood, who coined the term visionary fiction, being able to imagine the world that is yet to exist, that really uses the vehicle of the fantastic and of the radical imaginary to imagine the feeling, the vibe, the stories of liberated futures. So that's the practice of Wakanda Dream Lab. I'll pause there because I'm excited for this conversation. So let's go.
I love all of it. I love all of it. I think it's easy to make the associative leap of Afrofutures and the symbolic or kind of the signpost of Wakanda as like a visionary, imaginary kind of postmodern, anti-colonial kind of beyond the sort of hegemony, the kind of cultural hegemony that Black and African descended people find themselves subject to around the world. So Wakanda offers this idea of sanctuary. So I think Wakanda part is pretty clear, but I really want to talk a bit about the word dream. That word being so resonant in Black history, from the work and life of Langston Hughes to the dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You know, even Harriet Tubman's dream of freedom was entirely speculative. She had never seen the freedom she was running to. Or even Henry Box Turner, who mailed himself to freedom, right? He put himself in a box and he mailed himself to freedom, which is like he didn't know where he was mailing himself to. He just knew when he got there, he was going to be free. He was speculating on this idea of freedom. So can you tell me a little bit about the significance of the word dream in your work, and particularly from your perspective, the relationship between dreaming and foresight, or the relationship between sort of being able to write the story of that dream, to share the story of that dream, and how that differs or is similar in many ways to the concept of foresight?
Love that question. And quickly, just around Wakanda, I love that Wakanda is now a cultural signifier. As a comic nerd growing up, I didn't think that these kind of conversations or references would reach it to that level. And here we are. So in terms of dreaming, though, I'll start with the personal, because I come from a family of dreamers. And I mean that in every way possible, particularly the mothers of my family. My mom would have dreams when I was younger and would tell me things about myself. Like, Calvin, did you go to your friend's house when you said you weren't? And how'd you know? It's like, oh, it came to me in a dream. I dreamed that you were over there. And I would just be blown away and just imagine, like, you know, okay, if she ever tells me I shouldn't do something because it came to her in a dream, I'm receiving that.
Right.
The same with my grandmother, who would have these very vivid dreams and would tell us during story time what those dreams were, and do her fanciful interpretation or invite us to do so. And I'm also a very vivid dreamer. And so I've always been fascinated by dreams and the physiology and the chemistry and the biology and all of the inner workings of how dreams can happen. And what I also appreciate about dreams is also the, particularly in freedom dreams, right? To borrow from Robin D.G. Kelly around the imaginary as a place to, again, quoting Walida Imarisha here again, you cannot create what you cannot imagine, right? So being able to imagine and giving yourself the space to dream about what is possible beyond what is happening in your immediate material world. not to separate it, but to contextualize it, give it broader bookends, as it were. And so when I think about dreaming, and some of the just the physics of it, it's fascinating because in some ways it is futurity and it is foresight, because and some of the brain science around dreams is still emerging and forming. It's still a phenomena we're understanding as a collective. But you're able to, in your dreams, prefigure something that is about to happen that you will have an immersive experience around in real time, and be able to sometimes remember even after you wake up. It's where imagination and memory get to merge and dance with each other, and to be able to do that in a way that it's being guided by you, but it's this constant dream, create, and live cycle. And being in that cycle in dream time and dream space, it seems to elongate what you're able to imagine, what's possible, right? So taking that into practice, that is what the dream part is about, is inviting people into this dream space where you can merge memory with imagination, right? The memories of reclaiming that which has happened in the past, and all the parts that comes with it, all the parts that may inform the future, all the ways in which we can be present. And then to our anthology series being called Black Freedom Beyond Borders, it's being able to dream beyond the borders of time. And this is what I appreciate about Afrofuturism's invitation to see time as a colonial construct, and invite ourselves into the simultaneity of time, in the way that time moves and flows, and dreams often do that. So to that last part of the question, the foresight, I think of, it was Caldwell Ashun, who wrote about the futurity fatigue, right? Because of the ways in which Black folk in particular, but folks from at the time using third world, would be left out of futurism, or the practices would only be taken as an aesthetic among Black thinkers and philosophers, be it from Afro-Surrealism to Afrofuturism, as it was named, and being able to take that, to take futurism and futurity as a practice beyond just the determinism of time, the linear time, what happens next. So I see dreams in a relationship with particularly foresight, because it's the place where you can imagine what's possible, flowing in all sides of where time can flow. And so the last thing I'll say about that, particularly around freedom dreams, I think that's also the differentiation marker, is that we're thinking about an ecosystem that must be transformed, rather than how do we transform within an ecosystem of what exists, right? And so rather than being stuck in a time loop of, I'd love to talk about this a little bit more, perhaps later, about the OODA loop. You've heard of this, the observe, orient, decide, act, and just continuing to do that. That's a survival tactic within an ecosystem that is either going through disruption, or you are a disruption to the ecosystem and trying to adapt to survive, right? And to always be in that loop, your futurity and foresight can only go to what's the next survival tactic, what's the next challenge. I see dreaming as being able to break the loop a little bit and giving yourself the permission and the practice of dreaming to do the an elongated forecast. How can I transform this ecosystem? How is me being here transform it? And maybe I do need to be a fugitive from this ecosystem and create something new. So I'm gonna pause it there. I'm seeing some really juicy questions coming in the chat. So let's keep the conversation.
The questions are flowing. Before we go, before we head that direction, a couple of things I wanna think about. First being that there's kind of I don't know, a racist trope in the futurist conversation where Afrofuturism is often seen as some intuitive, creative, artistic, you divine Afrofuturism. But if
Right.
you want to talk about the practice of professional futurism or professional foresight, well, then you need to be trained or you need to get some kind of certificate or validation or degree. And so it leaves Afrofuturism as kind of like jazz, right? Where you
Yeah.
just, you're not really, there's no respect for the craft of what you're doing. It's more like you're doing it like finger painting, like it's just art. You're just throwing colors onto a wall and then saying, yeah, this is the future. So
Yeah.
the reason why I would label that as racist is because I think the dreaming, envisioning, foresight work that's done in indigenous communities and done in communities of people who have been subordinated by the hegemony tend to be referred to oftentimes as alternative. They're
Mhm.
considered to be extra. They're like elective. They're not urgent. They're not. They're not integral. So, but I think the work that you're doing is trying to, uh, I don't know, get people to consider rest, dreaming, imagining as an urgent
That's
thing,
right.
and that the art that emerges from that are just artifacts from that urgency. They're not art that is designed to be sold in a store. It's not a commodification of the future. It's actually an envisioning and imagining. And so whatever paintings that come out of that or products that come out of that, even the Black Panther film, it's just an artifact of this future imaginary. So that's one thing I wanted to throw, just
Yeah.
have that in your head when I ask this next question about freedom, because I heard you say freedom about 50 times. It's in a lot of the titles of the projects that you're leading. Freedom is a word that comes up a lot. And as I said earlier, Harriet Tubman's idea of freedom was very speculative. Dr. King talked about taking the first step when you can't see the top of the staircase. I would say that's an Afrofuturist idea. Langston Hughes talked about in Requiem for a Dream. He said, to fling my arms wide in the place of the sun and dance and whirl until the white day is done. That is my dream. So this is like an arming of this word dream in relation to this concept of freedom. And I just want you to talk about maybe what is the future of freedom?
That is the horizon that I wake up to every morning. That question of freedom futures. Um, and I say this, it's funny, we were talking about our children before we got on screen. Something that I say to myself, and sometimes I say out loud to Malik, my almost 2-year-old who think he's grown, but almost 2-year-old, who I keep saying, I want you to dream new dreams. And my hope is that the way that I'm dreaming now can do justice to the mantra that is popular in organizing circles today, movement circles today. We are our ancestors' wildest dreams, right? Am I dreaming wild dreams of what's possible, and still being rooted into what's necessary? And so to answer that question about freedom, I in our practice as Wakanda Dream Lab, there's 3 questions we do within our world building practice when we're about to create story worlds. The first is what now feels possible. Uh, the second question is what still feels necessary. And the third is what must feel irresistible for this to be a freedom dream, because those are like the
What was
warm
the
up
last one?
questions. What still must feel, or what must be irresistible? What must be irresistible? And because what we're building towards is the headliner, which is what is your most irresistible freedom dream? And it's intentionally 7 words because we give people 7 words to respond to it. It's a teaser trailer. It's forming. It's, as sometimes a dream, it might happen in fragments, but like the vibe, the essence, the value, there's something immersive that I can describe. But I tell people 7 words, 7 words. Because one of my favorite 7-word stories about freedom and freedom dreaming comes from Alicia Wormsley, and probably just saying Alicia Wormsley's name invokes the billboard in Pittsburgh. There are Black people in the future. And how that challenged and incited and excited and scared and enraged so many people in that neighborhood and across the country, across the world, with that 7-word story that is a dream, but also a matter of fact. It's a matter of practice. Because you have to then grapple with that dream being a reality. I think about what my good friend Terry Marshall says, one of the co-founders, all the time. He and Stephen Duncombe talk about the battlefield of the imagination, that we're in an imagination battle. We are living somebody's dream, and within that, we're living somebody's definition of what freedom is, like freedom from these constructs and constraints and constrictions. But we're also seeing a very interesting perversion of the definition of freedom and what that is, particularly over the last 12 months. And it's becoming, you're right, like we use that word a lot as, again, as a horizon point, that we're in some ways prefiguring, again, using that word a lot, that there's something that must shift, that there's something happening in the here and now that is what we must transform from if we're going to give permission for new dreams to emerge. And that really is the working definition, the living definition that I have around what it means to be in a freedom practice that's creating the space for new dreams, new dreamers, and new dreaming platforms to emerge. And once we're able to do that, particularly when it's rooted in abundance, rooted in joy, rooted in justice, and abundant possibilities for, I speak particularly to Black peoples across the diaspora, but in general, when I talk about that, it's towards that, again, the North Star of abolition, reparation, and liberation. Because if we're not in that constellation, freedom dream might look something different. Dreaming may look something different. Futurism may look something different. And it may look so different that you are offended by a 7-word story as simple as there are Black people in the future.
Right. No, I appreciate that answer. I want to do 2 things now in this moment of transition. I want to encourage folks in the chat to come up with a 7-word story about the future and to drop their 7-word forecast, dream, imaginary in the chat. So 7 words, there are Black people in the future, 7 words that are intended to be provocative, insightful, and perhaps open up new ideas about future possibility. And while you're thinking about that and considering that, I'm going to pull from some of the questions that have been asked that have been put either in the Q&A or in the chat, and continue the interview by pulling from some of these questions. And the first questions I want to ask are actually the last 2 that came in. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the methodologies that you talked about at the beginning, how you use storytelling, how you bring people together, maybe some of the resources that you rely on, like you shared Artivive. So are there other resources that you rely on to tell the story? And then the second part of this question is about your favorite examples of foresight and dreams that turned into tangible impact in the present. So how did you move from the space of the imaginary into the space of like reality, I guess is what we're saying, although I don't want to juxtapose imagination to reality, because I think imagination is also reality, but that's another, we could talk for an hour on that, and I don't want to do that. So tell us more about your methodologies.
Love it. Yes.
And then tell me a little bit about how you turn dreams into reality. How about that?
There we go. I will take that second question first. The how do we turn dreams into reality? And I think you are leading into what we're almost like a critical analysis of futurity and foresight by invitation, which is thinking of dreams as part of the reality, because this is a dream. Like if this isn't a dream world, I don't know what is. And part of it, and again, not to be flippant with the answer, but just want to put it in context that dreams doesn't necessarily mean separation from the material, right? That there is a relationship between lived experience. That's why earlier I mentioned memory, but also how do we interpret that in a way that gives space for the new to emerge, which is when I reference imagination. So again, dream being the memory and imagination, and so many. I could be as mundane. Think about Afrofuturism, mundane practices, right? As policy being at one point a dream. If we look at the language of the Breathe Act, that is a radical love letter born out of Black imagination about what if public policy rooted itself in Black love and Black joy, and that is how our systems were functioning. What if that were the governing principle? And so there's documentation that lives as in realities that are dreams, not just sublime, but in material. Other practices that, and again, giving a lot of shout outs to Intelligent Mischief around this, but other practices that I've been exploring and studying have been around maroonage. I'm part of this collective called Coterie, the Society of Black Utopians, and looking at the practice of Black utopian thought and freedom towns from the Colombos in Brazil. And I mean, once I get to name of them, I'll name so many and then leave so many out. But we're familiar with folks who were imagining in real place and space how they could reclaim sovereignty, determination, identity, and their definition of what freedom is, right? And that's been happening as long as colonization has been happening. And being able to uplift those parts, again, in our memory to inform what our imagination can go towards, and say, yeah, it's not actually ridiculous to write an anthology about abolition, because there were entire scripts and stories about abolition, be it in creating the new myths or new stories, or just the stories that existed, tracking people's freedom and journey into freedom and what that meant for them. And we need not look any further than songs and spirituals that emerge from those times that are still with us. Follow the Dipping Gourd. That is dripping with imagery, poetics, and dreams. And also, it was the roadmap. So listen to the song, interpret the lyrics, and you have a new future ahead of you.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the other question about the practices, so because it leads into it, I did mention a few areas, and I know it was kind of quick, and was also, I thought it was catchy, but just around the poetics, the proleptic, and the prophetic. And simply putting it, the poetic just being the meaning making, right? So when I talk about the poetic, it's similar to what Robin D.G. Kelley refers to as the role of poetic knowledge, to be able to take us to another place that allows us a different way of seeing, a different way of feeling. And so when I gather or coordinate world building sessions, a lot of what we first start off with is the meaning making around, or sorry, what is the feeling, the seeing, the new that we're wanting to dream into when it comes to that most irresistible freedom dream. what I talk about the proleptic, this for me is the world building itself, right? So I mentioned visionary fiction as one of the practices. Again, it's this anticipatory, prefigurative way to embody the values that we want to see emerge in full practice, in full abundance in the world that we're imagining, so that we can live in that full abundance, in our dignity, in our freedom, in our families, and just that in that way it is like future bending, but it's imagining what is about to happen. And so we involve that into our world building sessions, especially when we ask about what's now possible. And then lastly, around myth making, that's where we see in the prophetic interventions. And I lean a lot into the practices that we learned from Octavia Butler, who wrote her own stories. Speaking of, I'm wearing the shirt, Octavia Butler, writing ourselves into the story, writing ourselves into the future, telling stories that is filled with facts, making people feel, as she wrote in her manifesto. And being able to have a manifesto that claims and names that future, as you were saying, as a reality, that this is a reality. And people will experience it through an immersive way, be it through this story, but then be able to take it and explore something new in their own. And especially if that even means in their personal stories. And so many of her brilliant short stories were born out of, if you read afterwards from like Blood Child and Collected Stories, all the afterwards were reference points to her own life and how it inspired that particular moment and allowed her to process, be it her own pain, trauma, and healing, or again, the imaginary into something real and new. So yeah, that's how we're practicing it. And we kind of sum it all up by saying dream, create, and live, which isn't a linear process. It actually is baked in every part of our sessions, but as an iterative and discursive kind of practice, that by dreaming, creating, and living, and immersing ourselves in storytelling, in story sharing, using technologies like augmented reality, but also using the technology of call and response, the technology of a cipher, the technology of resting and listening, right?
Silence.
Right, silence.
Yeah.
So that we can give ourselves, again, not just the space to dream, but the permission to dream.
Yeah, I love that.
So yeah.
No, I love that. I think that that's really powerful. And I hope that folks got the methodologies that you dropped in all of what you said, from the use of poetics to the power of metaphor, to the use of stories, to kind of turning imaginings into artifacts or experiences. I think all of that is really powerful. There's still a couple more questions in here about dreaming. And before I ask them, because they're really interesting, I want to think about how, for African-American people in particular, the word dream, at least from a historical standpoint, has been optimistic. It's been a projection of an imaginary of optimism, where, because we never say like, we might say I had a bad dream, but in the context of our history, a bad dream is a nightmare. So, Malcolm X said the American dream, your American dream is our American nightmare. So it actually juxtaposes this relationship between sort of the pessimism of a dream, which might manifest itself as a nightmare, and the optimism of a dream, which would manifest as like what, Dr. King's dream, or, the other dreams that we've discussed. So just thinking about how it almost positions the work that you're doing, and particularly Afrofuturism in general, as an exercise in optimism, or as, and it brings Alicia Wormsley's 7-word future really to light, because it's like there is optimism in her future. That is an optimistic future.
Yes.
For Black people especially. For anybody for whom that is a pessimistic future, then that's the problem. That's our problem. Like that's what our survival is banging against, is somebody who does not imagine a future where we're present. So that said, okay, there's this great question about your, have you any thoughts about the connection between Australian Aboriginal dream time and dreaming practices, or other like indigenous dream practices or relationships, and sort of our, what I would call like, it's not, I know, and our Afro-Indigenous, our Afro-urban Indigenous, to use Chris Emdin's language, Dr. Chris Emdin's language, our Afro-urban Indigenous dream time. Do you see a relationship or connection between Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime or other Indigenous Dreamtime practices and the Afrofuturist kind of Wakanda Dreamtime methodologies that you're sharing with us?
An integral, intricate, and necessary relationship. And I say that very intentionally because of the many ways in which Indigenous futurism and Indigenous practices has, one, just inspired and excited me in conversations I've had with some of the folk who I'm blessed to have in my circles who are practitioners in that. And also because a part of Wakanda Dream Lab's story is inspired by some of those conversations that I had with, again, part of this transitions community. I'll give the shorthand because I know we're coming up on time. Would love to talk more about this part of the story, but the transitions community from Movement Strategy Center would bring in peoples from all across the country who had collectives that were, asking this transition question about how we move from this world to this world, right? I queued the question up earlier. And one of the folks who were there included folks from the Pueblo lands, and we're actually on the Pueblo lands in New Mexico, and they were talking about some of the Indigenous futurism. And so we were able to have this conversation across Wakanda Dream Lab and their work. and because we were there, I just started doing some historical research about the lands and some of the mountains that we are around, and the conversations around the simultaneity of time. There were so many crossover relationships with that, right? And so that's actually where I began, like literally in that place, in that gathering, was like, oh, what if we could tap into these messages as portals of, because it's a simultaneous of time, and it just required us to get into the right angle, like slip into the right angle to see what these messages and stories are. How can that emerge? Again, being playful with a concept that's also very real. But that's where augmented reality came in. It's like, oh, maybe I can drop a message into the mountain. And so when people look at this app through their phone, they'll see this message of like Afro-Indigenous futurity and futurism. And that was the first practice I had in using these technology, like these kind of like tech tools of telling these stories of, again, time. So looking at time and temporality in a way that accounts for the dream space and being able to have ancestral memory or ancient futures. I want to attribute that correctly. Once I remember who had that, I'll drop it, but ancient futures, right? That's something that is deeply rooted and connected in various practices of in African indigeneity, indigenous practices, Aboriginal practices across many lands. And so those are live conversations that we tap into and have inform in our practices, some of which are just personal practices that we do that then show up in how we do our anthology, artifacts, and art. And I want to just circle back to that. I love that you reference it as artifacts, because that is what we actually call a lot of our work around like future artifacts and archives, dream archives. So.
Awesome. And I want to thank Leon for dropping, he put in the ancient futures reference and a little bit about indigenous wisdom, which I think is powerful. I know that we're running up on time, so I want to come to this part that's kind of coming in the questions that we have here. I had it kind of written in my own script as kind of a question for you, which is, how can others who may not be of Wakanda, who may not be citizens of Wakanda, whatever that means, I don't even fully know what that means, But I want to think about how can those who are not citizens of Wakanda play a role in its imagining? And I want to think about what are some clear ways that institutions like IFTF or other futurists who are not in the Afrofuturist community in general can support freedom dreams and freedom dreaming in Black communities, can be a part of this conversation, maybe can make a contribution even from their positionality. And that positionality may be that of an ally. It may be that of somebody who's wanting to be an agent of change. It may be that of someone who's just learning and curious. Are there roles for, non-Wakanda citizens? And again, I say that facetiously and also really, right? Facetiously, am I saying if you're not Black, you're not Wakandan? I'm not really saying that.
Right.
I don't even know if I'm a citizen of Wakanda. So I'm not suggesting that only because your skin is a particular color, you're a Wakanda citizen. I don't have the blue thing under I'm not going to pull my mouth open, but I don't have like a blue coat on my lip, even an imaginary blue coat. Even I don't dream a blue coat on my lip. So, what's the role of non-citizens of Wakanda in kind of contributing to the Wakanda imaginary, the freedom imaginary, the dream imaginary?
Oh, I love this. Because in this way, collective dreaming, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is I'm hesitating to say a battlefield of dreams, because there's some spaces and places where that is the story that feels like it fits. But certainly when we think of like a garden of freedom dreams, or a garden of dreams, or an ecosystem, an ecology of dreams, there has to be some awareness around whose dreams get lifted up, whose dreams only get to live in dream space, and whose dreams can merge into the realm that we call reality, right? And I think as a collective of futurists, or those who practice foresight and forecast trends, futurity, etc., to one, just have like holding that level of awareness. I actually think a lot of Rumi for some reason to this question, well, for any reason, but around what is justice. Justice is giving water to trees. What is injustice? Giving water to thorns. Not every root, not every root that receives water, is necessarily lends itself towards justice. So when I think about that in relationship to the question, it's how could we be in relationship as an ecosystem where water may not be getting to some of the roots that need to be, not to say that the rest are thorns, but there are some trees that have yet to be watered in the same way. And how can we be in a balanced relationship about that? So one, creating the space of dreaming. Two, to engage with the same rigor and practice of citation, inclusion, and the rigors of Afrofuturism, not as an aesthetic only, because it is, but not only, but also as a methodology and as a practice, and what lessons can be learned. And I think some just uplifting some of the amazing work that's already happening here is that we're seeing amazing citation and reference to other thinkers, other philosophers, other futurists, and being able to name and trace that the lineage, right? The intellectual lineage of futurism, from Afrofuturists, from indigenous thinkers, and how that contributes to this existing practice. And more particularly with Wakanda Dream Lab, yeah, we've been looking to create more dream labs, right? To bring people together, be it through the technology of the call and response, the technology of augmented and mixed realities, and also into the practice of anthology and story world building. When we have opportunities to collaborate around anthologies to inform particularly real-time campaigns, the example I gave earlier, the Memories of Abolition Day, directly connected to a campaign about repealing and replacing the 1994 crime bill. The initial question is, what if we didn't have the 1994 crime bill? And I asked in response, well, what if we didn't have in our imagination culturally that a Black child could be a super predator? Right. So if we could take new questions that create a cultural shift and engage ourselves in that practice and create the spaces to do that, from organizing the policy to the mundane to our museum curations, that begins to, I think, shift the different practices in this ecosystem of futurism and futurity. So yeah,
absolutely.
I'll pause there.
It's like you don't have to be a citizen of Wakanda to think of a liberatory future for Black people. You shouldn't have to necessarily be someone who's a byproduct of non-colonial reality in order to see past colonialism. So I guess my last thing I want to say is, in my work, I often speak about the importance of inclusivity in the inputs we analyze from the past and the perspectives and company we keep in the present. And that's what makes it possible, the capacity of our foresight into the future to extend beyond ourselves. Different eyes on the same future may see different things based primarily on their positionality. And Afrofuture is about a particular positionality. It is more than aesthetic and philosophy. It's practice, it's method, it's futurity and action. And I feel like you really demonstrated that in your answers, in the illustrations, in the tools that you shared, and in your insights. And so I really appreciate that, because it not only makes a contribution to this conversation and to the work of IFTF, but on a broader level, it kind of formalizes what Afrofuturism is. It starts to provide replicable, kind of measurable points of practice that can lead to new anti-racist, anti-colonial outcomes. And I think that that is just really powerful. And I feel honored to even be in a conversation with you, asking you these questions in front of people, because usually it would just be me and you behind some, back room after some workshop.
Right.
Dude, we've been talking for 2 hours, man. What's going on? So I think it's good. I think we could continue to have this conversation. I would love to and I just want to put this on in Daria's ear, since she's staring right at me. We would love to have this conversation publicly, like at the Oakland Museum of California, while they have this big Afrofuture exhibit going on at the Oakland Museum. It would be tight to figure out a way to have this conversation with the public. Thank you, everybody, for being involved. Daria, to you.
Yeah. And I can see this. I mean, this has been wonderful. It has been provocative. It has been inspirational. Calvin, you are so lyrical. You woke up all these vocabulary words that I haven't thought of in a long time. So thank you so much, both of you. And hopefully we will be able to continue to grow this conversation. This session will be recorded, and just really delighted to have you both here. Next month, we are moving towards design futures a little bit more. Jacques Barcia and Doc Martens are going to dive into some speculative futures through a design lens. We always want to remind people that on our website, you can learn about IFTF Vantage, which is an opportunity for organizations to join in with other organizations in really building future readiness and getting access to our emerging signals and our cutting edge research, and having a Foresight Guide partner. And very importantly, we want to give you all some links here of how to stay connected with wonderful experiences like this one. So this has been really, really terrific, and like a little shot of energy. And I appreciate that and hope the conversation keeps going. Thank you all.